I have railed against people who complain about population as a problem for climate change in several other places on my channel. It's kind of a pet peeve for me because if you talk about population and don't talk about consumption, per capita carbon footprint, and so on, it can be very, very misleading. You can think of what would happen if all the poor people were eliminated somehow since the Industrial Revolution. How much would the emissions be reduced by now? Not much, you would think, right? Maybe 25%, because the rich people consume a lot and they are responsible for the emissions through history. And Pew Research here offers a nice report focused on India and key facts as India surpasses China as the world's most populous country. I'll use this as a prop to point out again that fertility rates are dropping everywhere. You educate women, it's not like college degree, a few years of school, high school, and they tend to have fewer kids, and richer women don't have more kids because they want to give each kid more wealth, which means more consumption. So population is a tricky problem, and how can you talk about population without looking at cute babies, right? They are the future is theirs, so we have to be very honest about what we are handing them and what we are blaming them for, right? So there is a lot of methodological details behind, there are a lot of methodological details behind the report and the graphs, but I'm not going to go through them. You should follow up if you're interested. India's population has more than doubled since 1950. The number of people in India by variant, so you have here billions, and you started in 1950 at around 353 million, and we reached 1.4 billion by 2021. We are still growing, even though the growth rate slows down because fertility rates are dropping, as we'll see in a minute. We are not yet below replacement, which is 2.1 kids per couple, because that's how many you have to produce on average to keep the population steady at least. And the projections are always tricky. It depends on what the assumptions are. So here you are with high variant going to 2.2 billion by 2100, medium at 1.5, and then low actually drops from the peak in about 2040 or so, right? So this is more likely, and this is even more important in the context of what the rest of the world will do, especially China, which is now struggling with decreasing, it has hit peak population. It's trying to incentivize women to have more kids, but you cannot pay women to have kids. There are lots of other factors involved. Okay, so what are the main points? India's population has grown by more than 1 billion since 1950, the year the UN population data begins. The exact size of the country's population is not easily known, given that India has not conducted a census since 2011. Unfortunately, it's been delayed, COVID, and then some other political issues, but it's estimated to have more than 1.4 billion people, greater than the entire population of Europe or the Americas. China too has more than 1.4 billion, but while China's population is declining, India's population continues to grow. This is as of the report, which was written in 2023. February 2023 is when it was released. People under the age of 25 account for more than 40% of India's population. In fact, there are so many Indians in this age group that roughly 1 in 5 people globally who are under the age of 25 live in India. Looking at India's age distribution another way, the country's median age is 28. By comparison, the median age is 38 in the United States and 39 in China. These things matter because they can be the workforce that can support the retiring people. Old people should be taken care of well by younger people. China faces serious issues following the one-child policy, where now there are lots of old people who have nobody to take care of them, but then you can have very high unemployment and very high discontent among the youth unless there are ways to create jobs for them, right? The other two most populous countries in the world, China and the US, have rapidly aging populations. Unlike India, adults ages 65 and older comprise only 7% of India's population as of this year in 2022, let's say, compared with 14% in China and 18% in the US, according to the UN census. Share of Indians who are 65 and older is likely to remain under 20% until 2063 and will not approach 30% until 2100 under the UN's medium variant projections. Obviously, 2063 and 2100 are far away. The way things are going, women don't want to get married, young people don't want to get married, they don't want to have children, and so on and so forth. So we don't know what will end up happening. There's a nice book called Empty Planet, which argues that population is going to crash and we're going to hit 1 billion by 2100. But on the other hand, you have people like Elon Musk saying we must all have children. I think he has some 11 children or something. So you have to decide for yourself where you fall on the spectrum. More than 4 in 10 people in India are under the age of 25 years. Number and share of people in India by age, you can see 0 to 25 is 42.7% over this is number and share of people, so this is millions, sort of 25 million. Age 25 to 64 is 50.2% and 65 and older is 7.1%. You have to make sure. I suspect this is not just millions, because this should add up to 1.4 billion. Okay, in India, people under 25 are projected to outnumber those ages 65 and older at least until 2078. So here you are going from 2022 when the report was concluded to 2100. So you have these various shares as of 2022. So 65 and older, 6.9 will increase to about 30%. Ages 25 to 64, almost 50% will almost remain the same, but peak somewhere in the 2040s and drop to 46.3%. And 25 under 25 is high at 43.3% now and will drop to 23.9%. So this is still not a bad mix, just in terms of supporting retired people with working population and so on. And this is a demographic advantage which helps India supply labor and expertise for the rest of the world as well. Okay, fourth point, the fertility rate in India is higher than in China and the US, but it has declined rapidly in recent decades. Also has to do with population, women getting educated and so on. So Indian woman is expected to have 2 children in her lifetime, a fertility rate that is higher than China's at 1.2, United States at 1.6, but much lower than India's 1992 value, which was 3.4, or 1950 when it was 5.9. So obviously there are steps along the way where the Malthusian disaster or catastrophe and population starving and the population bomb, etc., didn't happen because of green revolution. Lifespans went up because of medical advances, education went up, women started to have fewer kids, and so on and so forth. So here are India's fertility rates that have fallen, and religious gaps have shrunk, because in India there is a lot of tension between whether Muslims are breeding a lot and so on and so forth, but let's not get into that. So total fertility rates, all women, so Muslims, this is all women, and Hindus and Christians, Buddhists, Sikhs and Jains. So obviously there are still some differences, but paranoia may not be warranted for against any particular religious group. Fertility rates vary widely by community type and state in India. On the average, women in rural areas have 2.1 children in their lifetime, while women in urban areas have 1.6 children. So there is a widening gap between poor people and rich people. In that sense, rich people are having fewer kids, poor people still having slightly more kids, but that turns out to be an advantage in terms of labor market and cheap labor, drivers, workers, service industry, food delivery people, and so on and so forth. On average, Indian women in urban areas have their first child 1.5 years later than women in rural areas. Rural women get married earlier, have children earlier, urban women tend to get married as of now, but the new generation is trying to delay it or not have children and so on. Populations grew unevenly across India between 2001 and 2011 according to that census, and you can see there are some places where fertility rates or the growth rates are higher. Jammu and Kashmir, Rajasthan, these were used to be called Bimaru states, Bihar, Rajasthan, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Uttar Pradesh, and so on. But states have been reformed. Now you have Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, you have Uttarakhand, and so on and so forth. So the central states and some northeast states have, there are various socio-economic reasons why that uneven distribution of population growth happens. India's sex ratio at birth has been moving towards balance in recent years because Save the Girl Child kind of campaigns have worked, and there are lots of restrictions on ultrasounds and so on, so female feticide etc. can be reduced. Abortion is legal. Abortion is not a big debate in India, unlike US, let's say. Neither is gun, but anyway. India's artificially wide ratio of baby boys to baby girls, which arose in the 1970s from the use of prenatal diagnostic technology to facilitate sex-selective abortions, is narrowing. It's somewhat good news, but mostly less bad news, since there is still a lot of issues associated with that. Infant mortality in India has decreased 70% in the past 3 decades, but remains high by regional and international standards. So India still does poorly in many things like diarrheal diseases and mortality among children and so on. Typically, more people migrate out of India each year than into it, resulting in negative net migration. So India may begin to have net inward migration, but that may relate more to climate issues around the borders and so on. In a lot of rich people from the US, Indian expats are also coming back, like me. I came back after living in the US for over 30 years, and now I'm living here. In India, out migration typically exceeds in migration, so the net negative loss, especially the so-called brain drain, is expected to continue out. These of course are projections. If you have young population and the rest of the world needs expertise, labor, and so on, then young people tend to move out of the country. So I kind of ran through it. It's a brief report. I made it even briefer. The point is again that climate change and population are not so directly related as people tend to make it. Increased population doesn't necessarily increase emissions directly, because rich people still have fewer kids but consume more. Poor people may have more kids, but their carbon footprint per capita tends to be low. But there are negative issues anyway, because we put a lot of pressure on habitats, biodiversity, water, land use, and many species suffer because we encroach on their habitats and so on and so forth. So I'm not here to say population is not a problem, but when you talk about it in the context of climate change, then you have to be much more careful about what exactly that means. So if US has a per capita footprint of 16 tons per person per year, and it has 300 million people, China has, let's say, 7 tons per person per year and has 1.4 billion, and India has 1.3 tons, 3 tons per person per year, but has 1.4 billion, then you can see how the totals can still be not directly related to population. But the trick is that rich people in India or China also consume at the level of Western countries, so you're averaging over a very large range of carbon footprints. So per capita averaged over a large population like India's or China's can still be misleading. So in the US, per capita carbon footprints may be close to each other because there are poor people, but they also live a higher standard of living compared to poor people in India or China or Africa or elsewhere. So you have to keep all these things in mind when you talk about population. But the best news, good news, is that you can't force women to have children. The more the education you give them, the fewer children they tend to have or not have children at all. So educating girls is the best contraceptive. I will leave you with that. Okay.